Hello, it's Sarah from Hardcover Hearts, and I'm here today with my week of reading wrap-up. This is where I talk about the books that I read, the books that I'm currently reading, and potentially could read next week, given my mood. I had another really great reading week, but I struggled in some places, and you'll see that when we get to my list. So let's get started, and I'll talk about what I read. Finally completed The Illumination of Ursula Flight. This is by Anna Marie Crowhurst. I think I've oogled and awed over this a couple times. This book was an absolute delight. I actually think this one is what ruined me because it was so engaging. It's a Bilder's roman of this young girl. She's raised in 17th century coming of age. She's very imaginative, very dramatic. She's given to flights of fancy, and she has a meeting with a woman who's an actress at a very pivotal time in her youth. And that meeting put such an impression and planted a seed in her mind that now all she wants to do is create plays and write plays and become a writer and live this kind of magical, dramatic life. And real life kind of gets in the way. This is charming. The writing is sublime, so good. And there's even little mini plays that she writes in here. I'm not sure if you can see that, which sometimes pulls me out, but instead what she's doing, it's like a subtext on what's actually happening in the moment. It's in her mind, she's writing the narration of what's going on, which ended up being really charming and amusing. The writing was lovely. The characters were fantastic. I loved her plucky character, and I see why people love this book. It was fantastic. I gave it a 4-star only because it's really a 4.5, but I don't know that I'll reread it, which is what I reserved my 5s for, but didn't diminish the love that I have for this book. It was a great one. Now, immediately after, I jumped straight into Anita Brookner. This is Hotel du Lac. I get it, people. I really do. I get it now. This is set in, I would assume to be the 50s. It doesn't specify in here so far as I can remember, but it's post-war. It's far enough away from war that that's not kind of a theme through the book. And there's a modern woman, a single woman, and she is being sent away for some kind of misdeed that she did. And she's kind of blowing it off, like, whatever, I'm going to do a little penance, do my time, and then I'll just come back. Everything will be fine. Everything will have cooled off. And so that's her plan. She gets sent to this kind of dwindling, old-timey hotel, and it's at the tail end of the season. So most people have gone, and there are just a few stragglers that are still at this hotel. It's I think it's in the Swiss Alps. And she's trying to just do her time, and she thinks she's going to use it to write. She's a writer. But instead, she gets kind of swept up while trying to be an observer, gets swept up into what's happening at this hotel and how it reflects on her life and the options that she still has left to her, because she's not young anymore. And she is alone, and she is by herself in the world. There were a couple moments in this book where I quite literally was saying, no, don't do that. And the landing, she stuck the landing. I see why people love this book. This was so beautiful, so fantastic. Could not recommend it more. And I will be picking up more Anita Brookner, which so many people that I like have a fondness for Anita Brookner, so it should have been on my list anyway. But now, here we go. Fantastic. Then I wanted something light, because those were, we had the historical fun Bildungsroman and coming of age story. Then we had the kind of desperate older woman who got herself into some straits, trying to think through her next later years. So I wanted something a little lighter, and I thought I would get it with this book, Chocolates for Breakfast. This is by Pamela Moore. This is, look at that cover, gorgeous, right? This is one of the Burt books that I'm reading through. I will put a link below to that video. This is where I received a personalized book recommendation list that has turned out to be exceptional from Burt at Past Story Time. So this is from Pamela Moore, and I expected it from what I read about it. Courtney Farrell is a disaffected, sexually precocious 15-year-old, and she splits her time between Manhattan, where her father works in publishing, and Los Angeles, where her mother is a still beautiful Hollywood actress. So it had all that kind of frothy, fun, maybe sunny LA in the 60s, 70s. Actually, this is set in the late 50s, so it definitely feels a little bit more modern than it even. This could have been shocking for the time. I enjoyed this book. I didn't love it, and I don't think it's the book's fault. I think it was my fault. I think that sometimes books, your experience of them based on what you sandwich them in between, really has a huge impact. So I think we don't think about that enough, or as much as maybe we could. But for me, having just come off Hotel du Lac, I was already a little melancholy. I was already thinking about the future and choices made now and how it impacts the future. And so I think it created some anxiety for me in this character. I couldn't just let go and enjoy her errors and her learnings and her growing up. I think it definitely created some anxiety for me reading this, and I had more of an experience of, an older woman saying, "No, don't do that. Oh, don't do that. No, he's not good for you. Run." Then I could just sink in and enjoy it. Now, I do think that if I had read this in a different place in a different time, I would have had probably a different experience. So again, not the problem with the book. This was the character of Courtney is wonderful. Her mother is also a very interesting character. And there's a lot of hedonism, a lot of exploration that she has to do to come into her own and to figure out what it is that she is willing to settle for and what does she not want to accept. And I think those are things that, especially as women, we really have to learn pretty quickly if we're gonna come out of this unscathed, so to speak. So like I said, good book, very good book. Just for me at the time, didn't satisfy, it didn't scratch the itch that I was really looking for with it. I wanted something a little lighter, and there was an undercurrent of darkness to this, and melancholy that I gravitated to more when I read it than the lightness. But I still recommend Chocolates for Breakfast. Okay, and then I definitely needed something different. And for me, some of the heroines of my youth, of my younger days, were the women of the punk scene. And so we're talking about Patti Smith, Joan Jett, Susie Sue, Viv Albertine, Polly Styron, so many women. And included in that list is Debbie Harry, who just published her brand new memoir. And it's called Face It. And I found it on my library. The hold came up for the audiobook, and I thought, for sure, let me grab it. Started listening to it and had the most bizarre experience in that her voice and her accent reminds me so much of my mother-in-law, who I adore, but who is not a punk. And so to hear Debbie Harry talking about all these adventures she had in Alphabet City and the Lower East Side in New York and CBGBs and the Mabuhay. She has a great stories about the Mabuhay Garden here in San Francisco. It was a surreal experience to kind of conflate those two voices together. This was a good memoir. And what I like about Debbie is that she's not as gossipy as some other people. So it's more about her journey than it is about what was going on in the circus around her. So while I respect it, it doesn't make for as titillating a memoir as you probably can guess. But she has interesting things to say. And I really thought that her relationship with Chris Stein is handled beautifully and deftly. I think that her how she approaches the world and her no nonsense approach comes through very, very clear. And you kind of, a lot of women in the punk scene, that's how we had to be. We just got on with it, and we didn't let anyone stop us from doing what we wanted to do. And you see that coming through. There's not a lot of navel gazing and second guessing. It's very purposeful and directive. And unapologetic. I really admired. She doesn't make excuses. She doesn't look back and hand wring about what could have been done. She talks about the choices that she made at each inflection point in her life, which I admire. And she talks about growing as an artist and growing out of punk, but at the same time at her core and spirit being punk, which I also admire very much. And like to think that I still have those tendencies. And to me, those tendencies are a suspicion of authority, a willingness to be the only person doing it a certain way, the need to establish your boundaries and your authority over your own life, that self-determination, and not being afraid to confront ugly truths and talking truth to power. I think those are all elements that I have taken. And do it yourself, being willing to just do it yourself, not waiting for other people to do anything for you. So it's an independent spirit and a sensibility of being willing to let it all go and do it yourself if you need to. And she absolutely talks about moments after having lost everything. They went through a few different fires where everything was lost, and they literally had what they took on tour with them, which I think is pretty interesting. It's, if you're looking for the salacious, titillating gossip, maybe try the Jessica Simpson one that just came out. That will probably have that, but it won't be of the same scene. I think Viv Albertine had more of the community story, community aspect to it, and it was a little more titillating when it comes to that. And a similar scene, obviously, one was in London, one was in New York, but I admire both of them and like them for different reasons. But at the same time, great interplay between the two. And then also Patti Smith, Just Kids. You can't beat that for a memoir of that era and that time. So that's what I completed, and I thought that was incredibly successful. Now let me talk to you about all the DNFs, all the false starts. Maybe that's a better way to say it. It was false starts because I didn't get far enough to really dump it. I didn't even acknowledge that I was reading them, like in Goodreads. So my approach is I usually pick up a book and I try like a few pages, maybe a chapter or so. And if it's not moving me at the moment, I'll just put it aside. And that's what happened here. I think a DNF is where I get far enough in to make a really strong point of view. And usually that point of view is that it's not for me and I'm not going to want to, that I definitely don't want to continue. But I either I'm going to come back to it later or I'm going to dump it altogether. These were, I consider more about false starts where it may be the medium that didn't work or something. There was only really two DNFs in this that I probably will not go back to. So the first one, it was an audiobook. This is Jenny Offill's Weather. I saw Kamal had a fantastic review of this and really great discussion about what environmentalism means to him and conservation and ecology and all of that, along with the conversation about this book. I'm going to put a link to it below because I think it was exceptional. So I had really high hopes, but I think the medium for me should not be audio. I don't think audio works for this book at this time. Now, I did The Department of Speculation, her previous book, I did in audio and I really enjoyed it. But for some reason, it wasn't capturing me in the same way. And I think it's because I understand what she's trying to accomplish. And I think it will be better for me for this book to actually read the printed word. The second is The Familiars by Stacey Halls. Now, I mentioned that I wanted to get into this book. And I started listening to the audio, and the audio was lovely. It was a really soothing, great. I liked the narration. The challenge was I lost the thread. Sometimes this happens to me when I'm multitasking and I'm doing multiple things, but I lost the thread early enough that I knew I wanted to read it, but I didn't want to have to take the time to go back in the audio portion to figure out where I fell off. I'll come back to this in print. And so both of those were positive, putting aside to return with a purpose in a different format. Then I started Dear Girls by Ali Wong. So as I mentioned earlier, I wanted something light and frothy, and I thought this would be it. And Ali Wong, I find, she's a comedian. She's from San Francisco. She's really, really funny. She's super raunchy, very, very amusing. And I like her comedy, but this just didn't do anything for me. It just felt like I was wasting my time and it was filler. So I decided this was probably not going to be something that I pick up in any format. And I'll see her specials when they come through. And then a big disappointment, because this has been on my radar for a while. I had an ebook of this from one of those digital sales, and it had been personally recommended to me by a good friend. And that is The Book of Delights by Ross Gay. And it started off so well. The introduction was fantastic and felt like it was what I was looking for. And it talked about how, as a writing prompt, this guy Ross Gay decided to write about moments of delight and do it every single day, and how that act allowed him to be aware of delightful things that happened to him during the day and feed the need to write more delightful things. And so it became this virtuous cycle of goodness that enriched his life. So I thought, yeah, I love that kind of stuff. Absolutely. Shit's bleak right now. We've got real difficult things that are happening in the world right now. Some levity or some ability to find some bright spots is really something I'm palpably looking for right now. So I dove in, but immediately the change in the pace, it was too fast. It was too all over the place, too rabidly excitable. It felt like a puppy that's just kind of jumping all over you. And albeit cute, it's more annoying than it was insightful and thoughtful. So after about 2 chapters, I was like, I don't like the tone, and there's not enough beauty, which is interesting because of a book that's supposed to be delightful. I was finding it more anxiety making. So I don't know. I would love your opinion. If you've read this, should I go back to it? Does it change? Is it just that way in the beginning as he's uncovering delights that he's just like too excitable for it? I don't know. But that one got pushed aside. Now let's talk about what I'm currently reading. I have the 2 BookTube books, the last 2 that I have to finish for the BookTube prize. Can't talk about those. Let's see. I am reading, though, The Passing by Nella Larsen. Just started this last night. I would say I'm almost halfway through with it. I could not stop it. And what was so funny was this cover is gorgeous. I was wearing leggings at, end of the day, you put on your leggings and you relax, right? And they matched kind of this pattern right here in the eye. And I was like, oh, how funny. And then I opened the first page to the dedication, and the dedication is to someone who my husband's grandmother was very close friends with. How strange is that? So I feel an instant affinity and connection to this book. And then I jumped into the writing, and it's so simple, so beautiful. There's a lot here, and I'm loving the characters that we're being introduced to. Looking forward to seeing where this goes. But it's the story of two women, one woman who's light-skinned, the other who's of mixed descent. One of the women is out in society, known only as a white woman. Her history, no one knows. Her husband does not know. It's as if this entire part of her makeup is not there, never existed. And the other is light-skinned and able to socially come in and out, but does live as a Black woman. So still in the very, very beginning of it, these women were friends when they were very young, and they're reunited, and it's creating tension and anxiety and all these emotions. And I love a good, interesting women friend story. So I'm guaranteed this is going to be done by this evening, because I can't stop. I can't wait till lunch to read it. Ooh, and then another book that I just started. So as I mentioned, I was looking for something that had beauty and that had some soul. I wanted something with some depth and meaning and beauty. That's what I was looking for. I was really looking for some beautiful writing. And I had this book, again, digital sale, and said, well, let me try this. I don't know what took me so long. I'm cursing myself for not picking this up earlier, because the very first essay, I wrote a post on Instagram that I was shook. It grabbed me and would not let me go. It was so powerful and so beautiful. The book is The Abundance by Annie Dillard. Who was out there that knew that Annie Dillard existed and didn't tell me? And if you have other secrets like this, if you know people who write like this, please tell me, because I immediately got sucked in. This is a story about a woman. She's reflecting on the day that they've had. The day is exceptional in that there was an eclipse. She and her husband traveled to this place to see the eclipse. They go up this steep hill. They're sitting on this hill, and the eclipse starts to happen. And she says at that, and that's the moment I lost my mind. Her descriptions of leading up to the state of mind, the environment, the beauty of the landscape, her relationships to all of these things get fundamentally changed when all of a sudden the world, the way the light shifts in the world. And her descriptions of color, of what happens to the feel of the air, to the way her husband looks. And it's like she time travels back into the past, and you get to see the terror that must have been experienced by people who didn't understand astrology, didn't know it was coming, were in no way prepared emotionally to deal with what they just experienced, is palpable. It is so magnificent. It was one of those books I viscerally was buzzing and shaking a little bit. I actually read a couple sections to my husband, and he hates it. So he hates when I do that. So I don't do it very often, but I just felt the need to share it with someone, how amazing it was. So I'm going to be taking that one slow, because if this is just a sliver of what's available in this book, I am in for a delightful experience. And I've already heard that there's some other books of hers that I need to read. So please, more of those types of suggestions. I'm here for it. That's exactly what I want. And then let's talk about what I could be reading next week. So definitely I'm going to be teeing up and starting the read along of Frances Burney's Evelina. So we have this ready to go. I'm going to be closing the Voxer group later on this evening. So if you have not yet said you wanted to join, please leave a message. So excited for that. There's also a couple other books that I have. This is I Love You Too Much by Alicia Drake. Just a really gorgeous cover. And I love this end paper here. This I bought at Daunt, was hand sold to me. I don't know very much about it, except it's set in the 6th arrondissement in Paris. And it's a story of a 13-year-old boy who sees something. Ooh. So that sounds interesting. I also found this in my personal TBR. This is Diana Athill, a memoir. It's called Instead of a Letter. And it's an autobiography of her. And Hilary Mantel has blurbed it on the back. It's considered a masterpiece of the modern memoir. And it was published in 1962. And it's really about how she developed a romance with someone who was in the RAF. And he breaks off the engagement and married someone else and then went to war. And the impact that had on her life. And that just sounds beautiful, painful, stunning. And look at that cover. It's just everything. So that sounds like something I might want to dive into. And then I'd like to get to the second in the Penguin Classic series. This is the Copenhagen Trilogy. This is Youth by Tove Ditlevson. I hope I said that right. Another stunning cover. So I'd like to get to this. When I read the first one, it gave me Elena Ferranti vibes, without the very singular friendship. But the environment and the spirit of Copenhagen, working class Copenhagen, and poverty, and growing up at a specific time and place as a young girl. So that looks fantastic. Then March Mystery Madness is going to start next week. I'm going to do a whole video and going to put that up of tons of ideas for that. So I'm really excited. I think that's going to be the only March kind of thing I'm going to be doing per se, in terms of like big read-alongs. There are many other ones going on I think are really worthy, and I would love to join in, but this is not just the right time for me. So I'm going to stay with these and keep plugging on, especially because I have to finish the BookTube prize judging. So I'll get all that done. So please let me know any thoughts or comments or ideas about anything that I've talked about here below. I hope you have a fantastic reading weekend. Enjoy that extra day we get this year. What are you going to be reading? I'd love to know. Thank you so much, and talk to you soon. Bye.